What's going on, everyone? How are we today? It is that time. One Piece ban list. We just had Worlds. Saka won Worlds. What a surprise. Top 4 was all Saka. Congratulations to the Malaysian player who didn't end up winning Worlds. But this is all the news that we actually came here to see, which was what's on the ban list. So I'm just going to quickly move my face. That's not moving my face. Let's move my face out of the way so you can't see me for 2 seconds. But here is the ban list. Saka leader, gone. Whatever the card is that wasn't released, Explosion, Eruption, whatever it's called, and Great Eruption, all gone. These 3 cards are banned. Can't play any copies of them in your deck. And let me give you my opinions on what's happening. Saka leader was not expecting a leader to be banned. It's the first time a leader has been banned in the One Piece trading card game. I don't even think Whitebeard was banned, even in that weird red ban period we had. We are getting a little reprint that they have said for Saka. I don't have the image up now. Actually, I may be able to do this. We do have, this is the new Saka leader. Basically, it says you can discard, I know this says Kaido, but discard a Navy card from hand. Then cost -1 to one of your opponent's cards. So basically, taking the 2 effects, didn't mean to do that. Taking the 2 effects of Saka, here we go, of the Saka leader and putting them into 1, but you don't get to draw. Was not expecting Saka leader to be banned. Was expecting either Rebecca, Lucci, or Gecko to be banned. But I guess Bandai made the decision that Saka was the deck that was abusing all these cards, and Houndblaze as well. So it was the one that needed to go. Black and blue with cycle and cost minus on the leader did not need to exist in the card game. So it has been removed. The second one is this yellow card, Shock Impact or something. Can't remember what it's called in English. But this card was absurd. KO 5 or less, or add 1 card from your life to your hand, deal 1 damage to your opponent. Oh, sorry, deal 1 damage to your opponent, then add 1 card from your life to hand, only if your opponent has 1 life left. Super strong card, obviously. Wasn't expecting this to be banned. It was expecting Armorer to be hit, was not expecting this to be hit. But it is a super good card. Yellow needs to be hit in some way. This is the way they decided to do it. It makes a lot of sense, to be honest. Still a bit surprised it wasn't Armorer, but I guess this card is more versatile in yellow, which is why I kind of liked it. Being able to have just KO is good in yellow. Yellow doesn't have much good KO effects, but it's good. And Great Eruption, obviously, card was way too expensive for a starter deck card. Start off with, draw 1 card and choose one of your opponent's characters, gets -2 to its cost. But that effect is just super strong. You don't lose cards in hand, and you just get a lot of value. So those are cards banned. Let's talk about how it impacts the meta. So I've got a couple deck lists pulled up, and we can just kind of talk about each of the decks, how it's impacted, what its matchups are. So let's close out of that. So the first one we've got a Gecko list. Actually, we're going to talk about a different Gecko deck later. So we'll close this Gecko. We'll start off with Katakuri. So Katakuri as a deck, what changes? So first of all, we don't have these impacts. These get taken out for something else. This was one of the lists that did really well in Japan, I think at the end of the 06 format. But it loses a bit of its potential to steal games, and that's what Yellow really had. Yellow really had potential to steal games with impact if your opponent had 1 less life. This probably just goes back to being Thunderbolt for that similar effect of I'm a steal a game, but now you can only kill a blocker, you can't burn the life. But in the end of the day, I don't think it's actually going to impact Yellow negatively too much. Thunderbolt, still a good card, can still win you games, but it's not burning that life. So overall, I don't think it will impact Yellow too much. You won't have as good control in that middle game. You won't be able to play on 8 Don or something, play Okiku plus kill 1 of their 5 or less. So it makes your Purple Luffy matchup a lot harder. And I'm not exactly sure what the reason was. Actually, you know what? We can bring me back now. I'm not exactly sure what the reason was that Purple Luffy kind of died. I'm assuming Impact was definitely part of it, Yellow having an answer to these Purple Luffy blockers. So I'm sure Purple Luffy actually has a chance to come back, because I do see decks like Yamato being a problem for Purple Luffy and maybe even Reiju, but I do think Purple Luffy has a chance to kind of come back now that we don't have these cards. Maybe Onami was also a problem, but Yellow may have to be built a little bit differently. Sarko is probably also actually, that 8-drop Gecko is probably also a big problem for Purple Luffy. So with all these cards, Purple Luffy does have that little bit of a chance to come back. Moving on to Perona. Perona is like a similar thing. This deck list didn't even actually... Let's find a different Perona deck list. This is kind of not what I wanted to see. I wanted to see one that actually ran Great Eruption. Deck lists... Perona. That was one I looked at. Here's one top 16 at Bandai Card Fest. That sounds like it would be a solid list. Does this run Great Eruption? Alright, well, it looks like Perona doesn't even run Great Eruption very consistently, so it's obviously going to be one of those decks that kind of gets like a buff at the end of the day from running this. This is first place at an 1,000-person event, it looks like. Does this one run a Great Eruption? Alright, so Perona doesn't even run Great Eruption, so it's basically just not going to be impacted by this ban list. Saka was one of its decent-ish matchups, I believe, or maybe it was one of its rough ones. Give me 2 secs to remember what it was. Perona had a really bad Saka matchup. Had a very bad Saka matchup. So with Saka being gone, it definitely gets to be a better deck. Other decks aren't, like with Great Eruption being gone, you're not able to hit your board with yellow losing impact. Kuzans will survive so much longer, especially if you take that like 1 life. They can't even... Kuzan will be able to survive, which is going to make your yellow matchups so much easier. I think overall Perona gets a big buff from this ban list. Let's close this one off, go to Nami. Nami is one of those decks that I think gets one of the biggest buffs from this ban list. Now, Great Eruption doesn't change the deck whatsoever, that being bad, but Saka was a bad matchup, and the reason Saka was a bad matchup is Gecko is super efficient to come down, plus all those blue cards that bottom decked your battle cards just made it really awkward. With all of them gone, it's going to be a lot easier for Nami to kind of control. Well, sure, Gecko 8-cost Gecko still exists, and like Black Gecko is going to be a bad matchup as always, just because Perona is going to be hitting cards out of your hand, but you no longer have to deal with Saka with all that bottom deck potential, and you also don't have to deal with yellow just burning that last life and then swinging big. So you definitely get a lot of value as a Nami player from this ban list, so expect there to be more Nami. Moving on to Reiju. Reiju doesn't change too much from this ban list. It's going to sit in a pretty similar spot. And the reason I say this is because Saka was one of its good matchups, and Katakuri and like Yellow was also one of its good matchups, but Reject didn't really affect the matchup too much because there's not too many 5 costs to hit. Saka was like definitely one of your more favorable matchups, and Great Eruption wasn't too valuable in the deck, too valuable against the deck, because Ichi, against Black Ichi's like the main card you want to remove, and it's just so much more efficient to Ice Age the card. And previously you could like Hina plus leader effect on Saka. I'm just going to use Saka as an example, even though Saka's banned, but then you could like Houndblaze or Lucia or something. So you never needed Eruption. So the deck doesn't really get affected, but if anything, it gets worse because you're losing the Saka matchup as well as losing more black decks running higher counts of Great Eruption. Now they're going to be running higher counts of Ice Age, which means it's going to be easier for them to answer cards like Ichi. So definitely a little bit of a indirect nerf for Reiju. Moving on to Gecko. So this is the Singapore's qualifier for Worlds. This is what he played in EB01. I'm going to just bring attention that it is EB01. We do have this T-Bone here. This can just be Tashigi or another 2K, whichever one you think is best in our 06 meta, because obviously we don't have this. The deck, however, does remain relatively similar over the 2 formats. Obviously, it's a really good deck. Really good deck. But it gets better. So we do lose the 4 eruptions, but those 4 eruptions can be replaced with other cards. In 07, I believe there's a card which just straight replaces eruption in decks like Gecko and Lucci that like feel its drop quickly. I think if you've got 10 or more, it's like -3, so it's just like not good for early removal. But we're still running the 4 Ice Ages, and those great eruptions will probably like go to Kuzans. because you're not going to be able to clear Kuzan as efficiently in the mirror, and you're not going to be able to clear Kuzans as efficiently in yellow. So it's kind of just like super interesting that like Kuzan becomes a lot better card just because we're kind of hitting those cards that punish Kuzan a little bit. So I definitely think that Gecko gets a lot better from this ban list. Sure, losing Eruption hurts. It means you can't like play Absalom and Eruption early for that like early annoying removal, but I still think we're in quite a healthy spot. You're probably just like hard playing more Surus, which at the end of the day isn't the worst thing in the world, right? You're definitely playing more Kuzans and stuff like that. It'll be interesting to see where the deck goes. A list like this may even try to fit Rebecca and Hina back into the list, but Rebecca has never worked as well in Gecko lists because it doesn't have that 2-cost removal that Saka did with Houndblaze and the blue extra card. But this is good. And then arguably the biggest winner from the ban list is going to be Red Green Law. So this is the deck that Jeremy came 17th with at the OC Nationals. So this was a OPO5 format. Jeremy was able to beat 2 Sakas out of the 3 he played against. His only loss was Purple Luffy, which was Alan, who ended up winning the whole event. Came 5th at National Worlds. Congratulations, Alan. Amazing. And a second Saka that he kind of bricked. The matchup isn't as bad. Like he's saying it's not as bad as people think it is. And that's Saka, which has cards like it plays Lucci. This was when it was like Rebecca Hina Lucci format. So it plays Lucci effectively and clears board. It plays Houndblaze to also clear board and swing aggressively. When looking at what replaces Saka with that like annoying, we've only got one black deck in the format now, which is Gecko. Gecko sure is still able to run those Luccis, but it generally doesn't run as many of the Luccis. It may go to 4 just if Law starts to do better, but it doesn't have like the recursion until like the 8. It can't get cards in discard unless it's paying 1 early for the 2k, or if it just uses leader effect, but then does it like probably plays like a prone or something to rip a card out of hand. But you kind of like you have a bit more of a chance to build board, and you're not going to get Houndblazed. You could get Absalom, but that's only like 1 card that's being hit. So I do definitely think that Law is one of the biggest winners from this ban list. I think not being Houndblaze is like one of the biggest things for Law, because like you could Houndblaze the Law, the 5-cost Law, and that's just really rough. Sure, you can still like Lucci 2 of the small blockers, but not Great Eruption being gone, Houndblaze essentially being gone because Saka's gone, just Saka being gone in general is definitely a massive buff for Law. So I think Law is the biggest winner of this ban list. Anyway, those are my quick first reactions. I'm going to take a second to compose myself, and then we're going to get to the tier list. So I'll be back in a sec, guys. Alright, I'm back. Sorry, let me take those headphones off. Gosh. I'm back. I've composed myself. Let's go into the tier list. It's going to be a nice quick tier list. There are some decks here that I didn't talk about before, but they are definitely worth bringing up in the tier list. So let's get right into it. First of all, Whitebeard, it doesn't change. It's still pretty much just sitting around that C tier. It exists. Saka doesn't exist, so it's like one of its iffy matchups. I'm going to say like 50-50 matchups isn't there anymore, but 50-50 matchup not being there doesn't really change too much of anything. If anything, it's probably like a little bit Whitebeard favored. But Enel still exists. Stuff like Gecko is still hard to get through. Katakuri, like, I don't think any of these changes really help Whitebeard too much, and you don't see Whitebeard too much, so I'm going to put Whitebeard in C tier. Mind you, all these decks like are pretty close to each other, so they can all work. It's just kind of personal preference and whatnot. We're going to put Enel in B tier. Enel, as you'll see, will lose to essentially everything in A tier, but they beat everything in B tier and below. So it's like kind of that really awkward deck to place where it's going to beat the rest of the field, but it can't beat those top decks. Katakuri, even though we lost Impact, it's still just an A tier deck. I still think it's better than Enel in this format, just because that extra 1k you get on your leader swing helps you get like Okiku live early and stuff like that. I also think it uses Onami better. just because like you can look at your life and move stuff up and down. With Impact Gorn, you may see a bit more flexibility with builds running Onami, running Hiyori, but at the end of the day, we can only wait and see to see how those changes impact. I do expect to see Thunderbolt start to pop back up in Katakuri though. Then we have Purple Luffy. As I said, Purple Luffy gets better. Its yellow matchups gets better, which is good. We're no longer playing into Sakazuki, which is definitely valuable for Purple Luffy. The 8 cost Gecko Moria is still going to be just something that's rough for Purple Luffy to deal with. So it can't kind of set up with that 8 tier because Gecko Moria is going to be a rough matchup with Perona and stuff like that. But I do think losing, like getting rid of Sakazuki matchup helps a lot, and its yellow matchups going back to being pretty favored because we've lost Impact is super valuable. Gecko is still going to be sitting in this A tier. It is now the best black leader. There's no longer going to be a competition. Do I play Saka or do I play Gecko? If you're between the two, you're now playing Gecko. Losing Great Eruption definitely hurts, but you're now just playing Ice Age instead, and then so it's not the worst thing in the world. You can also play more Kuzans, as I said, as the cards that helped Black deal with Kuzan, aka being Great Eruption, is gone. They now have to Ice Age Plus move, which they go -2 in hand, and you went even to play the Kuzan, so you're generally fine with that. And then Yellow doesn't have an easy card to remove it, especially if you take those early lives, so you are low enough that Gidatsu can't kill it. Nami, as I said, Nami gets better because you don't have to deal with blue, with Sakazuki in particular bottom decking all your cards and Yellow cheesing you with that last life with Impact. So Nami is definitely a better deck. As I said, Red Green Law is one of the biggest winners of the ban list. I can't put it in A tier just yet because it's still relatively unproven. There's definitely going to be decks in here which will give it a run for its money. Gecko's still going to be rough. All these other decks in B tier, though, I can, like all these other decks I have on here at the moment, besides Gecko, I can definitely see Red Green Law getting its advantage over, but we will see what comes with the rest of these. Perona, don't know whether to put it in C or B tier. It definitely gets better. We'll put it in B tier for now. I do think a lot of these decks are just like relatively evenly matched. Perona has some really good matchups and some really bad matchups. It didn't run any of those black cards like the Great Eruption to start off with, so it being banned doesn't really hurt. But Saka going is definitely a big buff for Perona, as Saka was a rough matchup. Hound Blazing just those cards away was definitely super awkward for Perona to deal with, but it's still going to have awkward matchups with Gecko and stuff like that, but it is definitely a lot better of a deck. Now, I can see it potentially start to include Ice Age to look into having a better matchup into decks like Katakuri and stuff like that, because you can Ice Age it like a Big Mom or something and then rest it and KO it. So Perona, definitely a little bit more valuable deck. Sakazuki is banned. That's it. Yamato is C tier. It just lost one of its best matchups in Sakazuki. Some of these matchups on the top can be right rough, and Yamato is definitely a high roll deck. It losing Impact itself is going to be really rough for Yamato to really bounce back off it. So for that reason, it's going down to C tier. Zoro just lost one of its better matchups, so it's probably a C tier deck. But honestly, we're going to leave him B tier because you can never rule out just pure balls to the wall aggro. So for that reason, Zoro's just going to remain here in B tier. Reiju drops down to C tier in my opinion. It definitely lost one of its best matchups in Sakazuki, and Black's now going to be running higher copies of Ice Age, which means it's easier for decks like Gecko Moria to deal with its big 7 cost. Decks like Purple Luffy won't be able to deal with the 7 cost as easily. Red Green Law I think will be a problem just with the amount of blockers and stuff like that it will be able to produce. So I do think Reiju kind of belongs here in the C tier. I don't see it doing too well into most of these decks above it. So for that reason, it stays down in C. The other A tier deck we're adding is going to be Red Purple Law this format. Red Purple Law, I personally think it had like a pretty decent matchup into Sakazuki, but I'm going to talk about why I think the deck kind of jumps up to this A tier. Sakazuki was consistent and it could do stuff like Hound Blaze, your body's on board, so you don't really get as much advantage. But I do think just looking at the decks that it has to play into, it does have a pretty good time. Being able to bottom deck some of Gecko's cards is always going to be good. A similar thing with Purple Luffy is yellow could deal with its big blockers just by playing impact, but now yellow doesn't have a way to deal with its cards, and red purple law has always been able to remove some of yellow's bigger bodies with stuff like Gamma Knife, if it still runs it. It also has another 4 copies of Gordon if need be, so it definitely gets to be this better deck. It can hit bottom deck Okiku and stuff like that. I think with Great Eruption being gone, it's a lot harder to efficiently remove Law's bodies. You're going to have to use cards like Ice Age, which means you go -1 in hand, which is pretty big when red purple laws try and be more of that aggressive aggro deck. So for that reason, I think it sits up here in A tier. The other thing is the purple law SR from set 5. I think that card becomes decent again in law, purely because we're at the point where Great Eruption was what brought it, or Saka Leader is what brought it down to a 2 cost, which meant it could be removed. Now, like looking at the black matchups, it's so hard for that card to be removed just not being Ice Age, and the point of that law is always just to go plus in hand size, so if you're forcing them to burn an Ice Age on that, you're generally pretty happy. I think Uta's like a fake deck at the moment. It only has 4 2Ks that are searchable, so until I think we hit OP06, it's going to be pretty hard for Uta to go above this C tier. So this is your OP06 base format tier list in my personal opinion. There's not much I would change. There's definitely decks like Zoro and Perona, which I'm not exactly sure where to place. If we just remove these 2 decks, you kind of see what I believe is a pretty ideal lineup of what the format is going to shape out to be. I definitely think the 2 lore decks get a pretty big buff from this ban list. Now let's talk about the starter deck 13 card, starter deck 13 format, and the starter deck 13 leaders. Now, I don't think yellow changes too much. There's a potential we go into more 5-cost aces, because it's like, once again, it's like that awkward number to remove. Before, you could use the Great Eruption plus like leader effect on Saka to remove these 5-cost aces. Now it's just that little bit harder for those cards to be removed. So that 5-cost ace could give yellow a buff, could potentially put Enel into that A tier, just because I think 5-cost ace is a super strong card. But for now, we're just going to leave those rest of the decks and then just talk about this. I think Black Yellow Luffy is sitting between these 2 spots, and the reason for that is the way the deck wants to play. It just wants to take all its early life, play 8-drop Gecko, heal 2 life, and then the 8 with leader effect, and then the 8-drop Gecko plays 2 of the little boys, and then your leader puts 2 of the big boys into life, and then you play 2 big boys from that, make your leader 9k, and then kind of defend it from there. So that is what Black Yellow Luffy wants to do in a general sense. And I think one of the big things that was inhibiting that is stuff like blue being able to bottom deck after Sabo has come down. You could do stuff like just Nega Bunch and then bottom deck, as well as the scariness of just Pudding being a card that exists. Pudding is obviously one of the strongest cards coming out of OP05. Shuffle your opponent's hand into the deck, make them draw 5 cards. So for that reason, I think it has the potential to be S tier, but it does kind of need to draw those geckos. So it can be a little bit rough, which is why it definitely gets better in EB01 format. Let's talk about Sabo. Sabo's B tier. Sabo is like that next generation of aggro deck. It plays big bodies and swings big with those big bodies, which I think is super valuable. It just can play it can play the Rush Luffy, can play the Rush Ace. It's just a super good and solid red yellow deck. It heals. It really just has that like versatile play. I think I don't think, however, it will be much better than B tier just because it is a relatively linear play style. Play something, swing with it, put it in your life. And then I do unfortunately think Ace is C. The effect of leader to essentially gain a life is pretty good, or put a 5-cost into life and then use one of the babies to play that card from life, or you can use a card like Hiyori to essentially add that card to hand and then you've gained a life. I do think, however, you're just not playing any valuable cards. It's all like these little weenie 5-costs, which sure, whilst Sakura is gone, it's quite good, but I do think you're going to struggle into Gecko, even if it does have to Houndblaze you every once in a... not Houndblaze, sorry, Ice Age you every once in a while to remove the board. So this is what I think the meta will look like when we go into set when we go into starter deck 13. Remove the starter decks, and that's what I think the format will look like when we go into OP06. Anyway, guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, make sure you like, comment, subscribe down below, and let me think what you guys think of the ban list down below and what you would change in the tier list. Anyway, have a great day, and I'll catch you guys next time.